episode 32 of the Bithell Games Podcast. I'm Alexander Slawinski.
And I'm Mike Bithell.
Each week we talk games, what it's like to make games, and the random stuff we don't generally find time to talk about because we are playing and or making games. Quick show note, we are still on Guestapalooza. More guests will just keep coming. So if you got a topic for us to talk about with a guest, we can find a guest to talk about that topic. That's contact@bithellgames.com. Contact@bithellgames.com. This week's guest is Joe Wintergreen. Hello, Joe.
Hi.
Developer of Influx. However, the main reason he's on the show this week is because he's pretty into the Unreal Engine 4. He likes the Unreal Engine 4, correct, Joe?
It's good. I like it.
Meanwhile, Mike has been working in Unity with Thomas Was Alone, Volume, Coda, and our upcoming title, which we still can't talk about, but I've put the paperwork in, so hopefully we can talk about it in a couple of weeks.
That'd be awesome.
So this topic was spurred by an email from Andre, who said, let me read it quick here. I would love it if you could find a guest that can talk about Unreal Engine 4. I've been looking at this engine for more than a year, but there are still many, many unknowns. I'm especially interested in the two topics related to Unreal Engine 4. One, Unreal Engine 4 versus Unity 5, and two, the disadvantages of Unreal Engine 4. Now, at this show is we're going to try to make it work for devs and general audience and get it out. So we have a safe word. Now, if Joe and Mike start talking really high level, the safe word is CryEngine.
CryEngine.
Okay. So if you hear CryEngine during the show, take it a step back.
I feel we should have another one. So we should have something which lets us know if we're not talking in depth enough. So something like we could say hammer, say source engine,
talk
engine. If we're talk okay. Engine. If we're not interesting enough, Alexander, say talk engine, and we'll try and keep within those bounds.
So let's start this off by just the general. What do you two consider to be the differences between Unity and Unreal Engine? And I'll start off by saying, most people, the general audience, which I would be a part of, see Unity as a mobile-based engine that it sort of arose out of the rise of App Store apps about 7 years ago now, and became ubiquitous after that because kids were learning it in school, and so the next generation of devs started doing it. And in the same time, Unreal, which had been king of the hill for the previous console generations, and is still very widely used today by AAA, kind of lost itself in some bad press, and then just because the kids weren't learning it anymore, and because AAA wasn't hiring like it used to, so they weren't being integrated into the systems where they would learn Unreal. So that is the general knowledge. So you two go ahead from here, and I'll jump in every so often with some questions about the tech side of things or the finance side of things, and we'll go from there.
I'm going to jump in with a very quick correction, simply because I can just see the YouTube commenter leaning towards the keyboard. Actually, Unity, in terms of its actual kind of start, it started as an Apple Mac engine. That was its original style. So it was a very Mac-friendly development environment, which was, I think, generally started to make interactive content for Macs. And obviously Windows support happened. And it was actually quite a bit later that they kind of really lent into mobile. Now, I would say that you're right on a more kind of overall level that mobile was definitely where Unity grew. But I could see someone saying, "Oh, actually, it started as a Mac engine," so I just wanted to jump in. But yeah, other than that, I think that's a pretty kind of fair appraisal.
Yeah, sounds about
Joe,
right.
what do you reckon? Yeah.
I mean, I feel like for me, the time I started hearing about Unity, because I don't really do mobile anymore, is a few years ago, I guess, just whenever the big indie things started to take off. And Epic were really dropping the ball at that time, in terms of like, can you even make a game on Unreal? It was pretty inaccessible. They didn't really have any public licensing options.
No, you could do modding, which was how a lot of us were playing with. So I was playing with Unreal back as a student, and yeah, exactly. You play with modding, you'd make some stuff, and then there wasn't that kind of very clear roadmap to, okay, so how do I actually sell this?
Yeah, until 2009, I think. I was on the Source engine before that. I haven't really used Unity, I should probably say. I've used it a little bit just to try and get an idea if it's good for level design, pretty much. But before that, I was on the Source engine, which is just modding, and you can't really license it unless you get really lucky, and then you probably have a bad time anyway. And then UDK came out, which was Unreal Engine 3 without source code access, but you could make commercial games, and I got into that. And these days, of course, it's effectively open source.
So what does the license allow you to do? Like, is that so that you can create a title and then sell it commercially?
Yeah, you can pretty much do anything with it. They take, They take 5% of your earnings after the first, I think, $5,000 of each quarter. So, but you don't have to pay them anything up front. And it's also negotiable, which a lot of people don't realize. Is you can just.
Oh, are you talking about Unreal Engine 4 right now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we'll get to that. I've got all that information.
So what were you talking about?
Let's basically take it directly to, for developers looking between Unity and Unreal at this current time. What are the obvious differences?
The enormous one is source code, right? So this is something that matters a lot if you're working at higher levels. So I don't know, when you're using an engine is essentially doing a lot of the heavy lifting of the code. It's rendering the image on the screen, it's handling everything, it's handling platform compatibility, all manner of different things. And that's what an engine is. And that's great for a dev who wants to just kind of like us, someone at my kind of level where you're making games for different platforms. If it supports the console I want to go onto, it's probably fine. But what AAA often want is they want to really optimize their game and get absolutely the best they can get out of it. So they want to be able to actually change the engine code if they want to. And that's where Unreal ships with source code, whereas Unity doesn't. Is that still the case, Joe?
It does. Unreal still does. I didn't even know that Unity didn't.
No, Unity, I have no access. If I want to change the way Unity renders, I'm bang out of luck.
Oh,
like
really?
I can do shader stuff, material stuff on top of it. I can top level kind of stuff, but if I wanted to fundamentally change the way that Unity works, Unreal in theory you could combine. You can compile your own Unreal Engine with any code changed or tweaked that you want to, and that's what makes it so attractive to kind of AAAs in particular, because they can push it.
That's interesting, because back on UDK, which was UE3 with no source code, that became like a problem even for me doing relatively simple games at the time. And I was just like, oh god, full source code access. I'm going to change maybe like 5 things. But
those are really important 5 things, right?
Yeah, right. So like Influx is a game where you roll a ball around an island and solve puzzles. So it's a physically simulated ball. And the movement is really bad because it's got a capped angular velocity that I couldn't reach into the engine and change.
Right. So I think that might be the solution that Unity have done. So they, I think they're a little bit more open with those values. I think, but there is still hard stuff. I know with like Thomas Was Alone, for example. To get the physics working the way I wanted it to, so it felt good as a platformer. There is kind of some of the defaults in Unity. I mean, I've not made a platformer in Unity for many years, so I'm sure they've fixed this, but some of the defaults in Unity used to give kind of a bad feel to platforming games. It's something that the community had definitely kind of picked up on. So for Thomas Was Alone, I ended up having to build basically my own kind of collision and physics system, but on top of what they were doing. So it was this kind of weird, duct taped level of code on top of the engine. And that's what you don't have. I mean, the argument would be, I guess, that the vast majority of devs at kind of small to mid scale probably don't need that, as long as things like angular velocities and all this kind of stuff are, and whatever weird thing it ends up being, as long as you have access. And I would say as well, Unity are really helpful with that stuff. So like, you know, if you do hit one of those walls, they can be pretty cool. But that's the thing that I hear. That's the thing that I if I see Mark Rain at events, that's the thing he's kind of repeating: source code.
Mark Rain is one of the executives at Epic Games, which creates the Unreal Engine.
Thank you. Sorry, Alexander. So I think that's the one that immediately jumps out. What else? I mean, there's definitely a perception that I think Unreal games, it's quicker to get to something pretty, right? Like I feel like Unreal, the defaults are nicer. I still think a good art team can produce comparable stuff in Unity, but you have to jump through a lot more hoops. Do you reckon that's right, Joe?
Yeah, definitely. I can make something really good looking by accident on Unreal. And it definitely seems like, as you say, there's a lot of hoops to jump through to get something looking comparable in Unity to something that I spend not very much time on at all in Unreal. I can't help feeling like I'm kind of almost talking out of turn here because I haven't used Unity much, but you know, most of my exposure to it is I'll be on Twitter and someone will be like, how do you do this in Unity? Or why can't I do this in Unity? And it's always something really basic to me. Like the lighting solver is apparently just bad for static lighting or for dynamic lighting. And obviously you don't have to worry about that with Unreal because it's the same one that they use for Gears of War and whatever else.
Well, my question is that an interface issue? Is it that when you're using is the Unity interface just not as clean as so a person who can't dive that deep just isn't seeing the tools that are available to them? Like what are the it goes back to the source code thing again. It's literally the way Unity renders light bouncing around a scene is different to Unreal. And yeah, I think arguably in a lot of ways weaker. This is the thing where, like, because I can't change the way Unity handles lighting very easily, it becomes a case of, well, that's what you have, and you can tweak in the margins and find tricks to kind of get a little bit more out of stuff. But yeah, it seems that Unreal just is better at all of that stuff, and that's what gives you that visual. But just the defaults, like I see you put up demos, Joe, where you have like the default kind of prototype character running around and doing stuff, and just that little bit of motion blur that Unreal, I assume, just gives you for free at the start. You just have some motion blur, and it just immediately just makes it look way more polished and clean. And whereas if I want to add motion blur, that's something I have to add in. It's something I have to play with the values for. It's probably really expensive at runtime in terms of frame rate. It's more steps. I still think, like I said, I think with good art direction and a good art team, you can get there. But with Unreal, it seems that you don't need to. Like you say, you can almost by accident make something that looks good. Fire is really good in Unreal. Those kind of things, like basically all the problems they've had to solve for Gears of War, for Unreal, for all of the projects they make. Yeah, it just seems like you have a lot of that stuff very easily. So now, can you define the difference between something like the Unity Asset Store and then Unreal's blueprints? Joe, I know that you mess around with blueprints, and I know that when we've talked to Epic, they very much emphasize that folks aren't using Blueprint enough. So can you talk
You're combining two things that are not compatible there, Alex. I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in because I think that's going to be a very hard question for Joe to answer. So Asset Store and Blueprint are not the same kind of aspect. The Unreal has an asset store, which is more of an equivalent to the Unity Asset Store. What Blueprint is a simplified scripting system, so it's more like flow charting. So the better question might be like, how does Blueprint differ to writing C# or JavaScript in Unity script in my case?
And see, I'd like to point out that I actually got that one from folks.
So I think there is a misunderstanding of what
this isn't
right?
just a me being like stupid non-coder guy.
Oh, no. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that. It's I think there is there's a misconception that I think people do. I'll tell you what, let's come up with a better question for the audience. What's Blueprint, Joe?
Blueprint is a visual scripting system that takes the place of what was Unreal Script in UE3, which was a simplified kind of C that you would use only for game code and not engine code. So as the reason they're always telling you to use it, and that they want that to be their big selling point, and it should be, is because for instance, I'm not like a coder, really. I've done like a little bit of Unreal Script, which, people say isn't even a real programming language. I can't say I know C++ or anything like that. No. But I'm making a stealth game at the moment, and I'm the only person doing code on it. And I say I'm doing code, it's Blueprint. It's the same, concepts that you deal with in code all the time, but you can't mess up on syntax. And you have nice, pretty flowcharts, and it's extremely easy to debug, and you don't have compile times.
That's amazing, because syntax is the one that I made Alexander laugh. I had a bug the other night in Unity, which I think I was working on for about 5 hours before I realized that.
Oh, is this the capitalization thing?
I'd not capitalized an F.
Right.
One of my it was with the save system, just was one of those ones that wasn't getting caught by any of the debug tools. It's
like Mike literally sent me that piece of code, and he's just like, I found the bug, and he's like copies and pastes it over to me. He's like, can you see the difference? I was like, what, the capital F? He's like, yeah. I was like, this is stupid. He's like, computers are stupid.
That's the thing, though. I think that's the thing is computers are really that's like programming. I always describe programming to students as like it's trying to explain simple tasks to an idiot who is going to consistently perform exactly the task you ask them to do, but they are an idiot, so you're going to have to explain everything in complete detail. And it sounds like Blueprint is kind of, if coding is, okay, take the toothbrush in your hand, make sure it's held up the right way, now rotate it, put it in your mouth, rub it back and forth. Are you still holding onto it, or have you dropped it? If you've dropped it, pick it up, to go brush your teeth. Like that's the level I think Blueprint seems to have gone to, right? Like it's just cleaned up that and makes a lot of assumptions. I assume that you can dig in, right? So if there's something that the assumption is wrong in terms of like how it should do something, I assume is there a granular kind of fidelity to it that you can go in and like finesse something very specific?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to explain, I guess. It's really just node-based code. So
right.
So if a function exists and it's like, oh, that didn't work how I expected it to, you can probably just open it up and make your own one of that that works the way you wanted it to.
And a node is you write that in script, right?
No, not necessarily. It can be like.
Can a node also be a blueprint then?
And yeah, a node can contain nodes in it. Like you can make a function in Blueprint that just like. It's a bunch of little visual boxes for like plus this and add that and get the vector length of the other, and then
gotcha.
Those within those.
So it's like fractal kind of flowcharts. That's awesome.
It can be.
That sounds legitimately fun. Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah. You don't want it too fractal, right? Yeah.
So how is Blueprint different than what Unity does, or it just doesn't have that option?
Unity doesn't have that, right? It's just but you have your choice of multiple programming languages.
Yeah, you have multiple programming languages. There is some state machine stuff in Unity. So state machine is kind of the old approach to this stuff, which is it's kind of a halfway house where you have a flowchart but running code. So there's some of that stuff in there, and there's some third-party solutions. I believe someone has actually made like almost like a Blueprint clone. I think it's called Playmaker for using, which I know a lot of devs use. Which I always get really squeamish about using kind of third-party tools for that kind of stuff, just because you worry about like how optimized is this, how clean is this, blah blah blah.
That's kind of an issue I think about when I have thought about making stuff in Unity before. Is like once you've gone through the asset store and presumably spent a bunch of money, you could potentially have as capable in terms of tool set and engine as Unreal, but yeah, I feel like one of those things could fall out from under you. Yeah.
And that's happened to me on every project I've ever done where we've made use of Unity assets. There's been one asset that we've had to like go to the developer. It's happening on the new thing now. Fortunately, in this case, a really great, helpful developer who kind of helped us out. But yeah, there is you are relying on other people's code, which is a gamble. I mean, fortunately, the costs are kind of so relatively low compared to like hiring a coder to do the thing. That it's kind of a reasonably safe gamble. And I know our policy with Unity assets is I just buy stuff if I want it. and we worry about it later, because it always works out cheaper to just like to get something in that just works and then tweak it later or fix it later or find a way of optimizing that or changing it.
Or to even consult with that programmer, like,
which is what we've done, and it's that works well. And I mean, we've even like gone and literally like paid someone to extend their asset for us and stuff like that. I think it makes sense, but you are relying on a third party. How's the Unreal Asset Store kind of stacking up? Because I know it's a bit younger. That came about like a year ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah, something like that. I actually sell some stuff on there. One of the advantages, I guess, I'm not sure if this is the case in Unity, is currently at least with the Unreal Store, if you buy an asset that is code or blueprint, you have the source code for it. So if anything goes horribly wrong...
Okay, that's not always the case in Unity, yeah. You can still jump in and have a look yourself.
Yeah, which reduces the support burden a lot for me.
That's good.
Because I've got PMs from people being like, how do I do this? Wait, never mind, figured it out. Someone added multiplayer to my fire propagation system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which...
CryEngine.
Fire propagation.
I was about to start talking about
amusingly, the brilliant thing here is that the fire propagation is actually something Joe stole from CryEngine. So fire propagation is it's that thing where you're in Far Cry 2 and there's fire moving through the moving between the grass and kind of spreading in organic fashion. And Joe, you made that for Unreal, didn't you? I think.
Yeah, that was one of my first marketplace packages, and I've had to update it a few times because I wasn't as good at Blueprint at that point. But yeah, that's another thing that I did all in Blueprint.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, which is...
And people are okay with purchasing stuff made in Blueprint. There isn't a snobbery about it that this isn't real code.
No, I mean, occasionally you run into a person with that kind of snobbery, but like...
They're idiots.
They're an idiot and they don't ship a game. Just like you run into people who are snobs about who think it's whatever you price your thing on the marketplace is too expensive and haven't considered how much it would be to pay minimum wage to somebody for half an hour,
Yeah. People who get into inane arguments about whether Unity or Unreal's better, and you look at their profile and you realize you've never released a game, and I understand why. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, fair play. Oh, that was a nice little thing for us. That was fun. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah.
You've got ladders, haven't you, in there as well?
I have. I've got a procedural ladder system that, not for the actual ladder climbing, but for the visual aspect of the ladder, because as a level designer on Source, and then again on Unreal, you always had to piece together ladders by you have a canned ladder mesh that's 90 centimeters long. That's always 96 centimeters long. And you got to just put them end to end, and then you get lighting seams in between them, and then part of it has to go onto the ground, whatever. I made a thing that just generates procedural ladder meshes. It pieces together meshes out of meshes that you already have, and you can customize everything about it.
That's not Bluetooth. Bluetooth? That's not Blueprint, is it? As well.
That is Blueprint.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I always see. I've got this is something I'm excited to start playing with Unreal a bit, because my assumption with Blueprint is that I'm thinking of it in terms of those kind of baby block kind of programming toys I played with as a kid, where it's I'm going to be able to make sphere move forward, and that's going to be fine. But I'm not going to. But then the more I hear about Blueprint and the level of complexity you can actually do with it, it's very tempting, and just the idea of never having to worry about syntax again, and having a really visual way of understanding how game logic's working, and because that's the great thing with Blueprint as well, I think maybe doesn't get as much chatter about it, is communication. Right now, if Alexander and me are talking about the design of an aspect of the game, I have to I can't just send you code, Alexander. I can't send you a piece of code. That wouldn't help, and we wouldn't be able to understand it or communicate it. So I end up usually just kind of talking and explaining it, whereas with Blueprint's visual enough that I think you could show it to someone like Alexander who's got logical thinking but doesn't know programming, and they can go, okay, I see, so that happens, then that happens, then that happens, and that is a split where this or this could happen. And you can start sharing that with people who aren't programmers and saying this is how it works.
Not only that, but everything in Unreal Engine, with maybe some exception somewhere, but pretty much everything you can copy straight out of the editor into plain text, put it in Notepad, send the TXT to somebody, and they paste it into Unreal Engine at their end, and it's there.
No way. You can export. You can do copying. You can export basically text files that contain copy paste data. That's amazing.
Yeah, I can copy paste an entire map.
That's such a hardcore nerd thing. That's awesome.
Or this, like my directional light. I did this the other day. Like I set up the lighting just how I wanted it in a level, but I wasn't the one who had the level checked out on the SVN at the time, CryEngine. So I just pasted him the sun from my map, and he had it, and it was fun.
That's awesome.
Or I could be editing a shader, which I have a visual thing to edit, which I don't have in Unity.
No, in Unity you're writing it in code. Yep.
Yeah,
unless you buy it exactly how you say.
Which is such a weird thing. Why would you think that the shaders would be something that the programmer should be doing? That's an artist thing. Anyway,
I think it's a hangover. This is the thing. That's the really interesting thing. I mean, I remember when I think this is the big fascinating structural thing that's changed is that when I got into Unity, what was exciting about Unity when I started using it to make Thomas Was Alone like 6 or 7 years ago, something like that. Or is it longer? No, it's way longer, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway,
let's not think about it.
The thing that excited me about that, after working with Unreal, and I used to work with Blitz Tech, which was the internal engine at a game studio I worked at. And the great thing about Unity was it felt fresh. It felt like there's no history here. You know, at that point when you loaded up Unreal, I think it was Unreal 3 at that point, you had like assets from Unreal in the folders and stuff.
You literally had Unreal Tournament 3, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, it felt weird. It felt like, you know, it felt like there was a lot of legacy stuff there that was just wasting time, whereas Unity was just this fresh virgin space that you could just step into and make stuff, and you didn't feel burdened by all that pointless gubbins. And now what's happened is I think Unreal have cleaned up their user interface and their user experience stuff so much that now it's like all that stuff's hidden away, so you're not frustrated by, oh, why is there this blooming gun from Unreal Tournament in my hands by default? And now it's a case of stuff like that where you're saying where like you can take all that knowledge of shaders and go, well, yeah, shaders should be an artist's thing to edit. That shouldn't be presented as script. Whereas I think Unity, because it started at first principles, shaders are still a scripting thing. So, you know, you're sat there typing code in order to make. With the new project, I've written a bunch of shaders, and the idea of doing that, you know, Alexander, I write that all as code basically, and then I load up the game to see, or I jump into the game to see if that shader looks nice, and I make tweaks. Whereas in Unreal, it's more akin to Photoshop, right? You're just kind of dragging nodes together and seeing how things flow and see what comes out the other end. Yeah,
similar to Blueprint again. It's just a bunch of it's like big flowchart. What ends up in a normal map? What ends up in base color, metallic, blah blah blah.
So cool. But yeah, no, it's code. That's the thing, and it's something I've had to teach myself because of. Well, I taught myself initially because in Volume, I wanted to do that shattering explosion effect that we do in Volume, which required a new shader. But what's nice now is working with it, and we have to be careful about what we say, but we're working in a way that necessitates making our own shaders and being really good with optimization. So it's really working well in that.
So to sort of start wrapping things up on this, the idea here is if someone is currently debating between Unity and Unreal, if they're thinking towards the future, whether that involves VR or monitor-based games, I still don't know what we're calling these. What we're calling like normal games anymore.
Real reality.
Real reality.
Is there a difference between stability and performance between the two engines, and does that apply to something like VR versus a monitor game?
Right now, Unreal is, I mean, Joe, I'm not sure if back me up, but Unreal is massively ahead in terms of performance right now, in terms of stability, in terms of support as well. I mean, I know Unreal on console is probably a better experience for the developer right now than Unity. These things go back and forth. I think that's the key thing to say here is that, you know, Unity was great, now Unreal's great. Maybe it'll loop back to Unity again in a year, you know what I mean? Like, but right at this moment, it feels like Unreal's probably the better engine in terms of getting the performance out of the consoles. I've not seen. I mean, have you experimented much with VR in Unreal? How's that work? I've not done any VR work with Unreal.
I've done a fair bit. It's really good. It's just, I mean, I sound like a total shill for Unreal today, but you plug in your Vive or your Oculus and you run it, and you instead of clicking play as you usually would to play it in the editor, you click VR preview and you put on a headset and you're in your game.
Okay.
And straight out of the box, if you don't set anything up at all, you're still looking around a room and walking around a room. And there's a new thing where you can edit your maps, your levels, and your game. You can make your game while you're in VR.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, and probably not something I want to do because I'll definitely barf after doing the kind of thing you do in a level editor. But yeah, everything I've heard is that Unity's console experience is not so very good.
I know lots of people who've run into troubles with it recently. I think they've just I think they've not quite gotten up to speed on every platform as well as they could have. But like I said, it's cyclical. I'm sure they'll fix it, and then it'll be great.
But we've definitely hit the word on the street, being that there are challenges in terms of Unity, and Unreal has absolutely taken advantage of that word on the street.
I'm making my game for PC and PS4, and so for PS4 at least, Unreal is super easy. And I've heard I have some friends down the street who are doing the same thing with Xbox One, and it really is like once you get the dev kit set up in the way that you need to do for any engine, you pretty much just have to click deploy to PS4 and it's playing on your PS4 in like 5 minutes.
So that you aren't a total shill on this episode, what do you consider to be the greatest challenge to Unreal right now?
Challenge in terms of like competition, or thing that I don't like about Unreal?
Both.
Competition is Unity is objectively better for mobile at the moment. There's a really good mobile renderer on Unreal, but it's not gonna run really well on low end phones for the most part. You can make a 2D game on there if you want, but then like there's a lot of issues. You end up having way too big a file. You have like 150 megs of app for like, I don't know, Pong.
Wow. Wow.
There's ways to reduce it, but you have to dive into the engine code, which you can do. But and you probably just won't get the performance that you'll get out of Unity because Unity has a lot more mobile heritage. Thing that I don't like about Unreal, not that this is any better in Unity, but is the level design tools are not really level design tools in the way that I'm used to. I think I've done some videos about this that maybe might have seen, but
I have, and I completely agree with you.
Yeah, I feel like level design tools have gone drastically downhill pretty much ever since maybe like Quake 2.
Can we have a 5-minute, 10-minute segue here, Alexander? Because this is a very interesting topic that's not really a Unity or Unreal problem, but it's interesting, and Joe's got some strong opinions on it.
Go for it.
So historically, we used to use for 3D worlds, so first-person games, you would use brushes. You would have a system that was very, very focused on the level designer. So you would basically go in and you would just be using brush. You'd draw out levels. You'd be drawing corridors. You'd be making shapes. You'd be cutting out of this virtual solid to create a map, which is a really great, fast way of a level designer making stuff. And then you would go in with an artist and you would add stuff. So you would, put lamps on the walls and you would put, railings on the floor, and an artist would come in and kind of add elements that make that pretty.
So like our volume level creator.
So exactly like our volume level creator.
Sounds great.
You should ship that. We should ship that, and we do. So yeah, you totally can make volume levels in it. That wouldn't be a terrible level. That would be an interesting anyway. Something we should put on the asset store. But basically, like what the shift that happened was as games became more visually complex and more art kind of driven. What happened was the tools got worse because this idea of Lego level generation became very popular, which is the idea that you make a piece of corridor and then you duplicate it out and make a long corridor, which kind of puts a lot of constraints on level designers, a lot of room for messy errors, and it just takes off the freedom to create the most enjoyable experience and level. So Joe, talk about this.
Yeah. So, it used to be, I was watching, there's these videos with JP LeBreton and John Romero playing Doom, right? A little while ago. I was watching these, and Romero's like playing like JP's favorite level of Doom or something. He's like, yeah, I made this in like an afternoon with blah, blah. And it didn't really change much after that. And it's like, oh, you made a level in an afternoon. Well, it was Doom. But on Quake, you could do that. And on Quake 2, you could do that. On Half-Life, you could do that. And on Half-Life 2, you could do that. Left 4 Dead, you can do that. And then this, so the Source engine kind of stayed on that trajectory. But every other engine went in this different direction of modular mesh-based level design, which like,
it's a Lego piece approach, yeah.
It's Lego. It's like you glue stuff together that somebody made for you that works a job that isn't your job, that is a completely different job. So now not only did you like sacrifice the ability to make anything you want to be able to put more polygons on a wall, you're now dependent on somebody else, at least one person, before you can do almost anything that is part of your job. And this really doesn't scale well either. Like, it maybe works okay if you're Epic Games and you have a big art department and you just walk over to the art department and be like, make me a set of meshes that make, a forest look good, or an industrial environment. But if you're an indie team and you have 2 artists, if you're lucky, you just straight up cannot do it that way sustainably. You'll end up with garbage, or you'll work on it for like 10 years and end up with something that's kind of okay. And it's a weird thing to discuss on the internet because there's like a lot of opposition to changing from that because it's now the status quo.
I think it's what a lot of people have grown up with. A lot of people, we're the old guys, right? And there's always that thing, and I think it's valid of like, well, you just want it to be the way it was, and we've got this new approach, and it's that we're the classic old man yelling at cloud on this. But I do think we're right.
Why is the new approach considered by them better?
Outcome. Do you get the levels look better?
The levels look better, but you necessarily spent less time iterating on it. So it probably isn't as good.
That corridor looks great, but you know what? It could probably stand to be half a meter shorter in order to make that encounter more fun.
Or maybe not a corridor at all. And
or maybe not a corridor at all. Yeah. You get a lot of corridors too. Yeah.
When you're making a map for Half-Life 2 or Quake or Doom, you make a change and you see the result immediately, and you can run through it pretty much immediately and be like, "That's no good. I need this whole way to be wider." And if you try to make that same choice with modular mesh-based level design, you've now, you either couldn't do it at all, or you've now, stretched an art asset that wasn't meant to be stretched, or you put it through a wall. So now you can't put something on the other side of that wall. It really only makes sense if you can just go and get a big art team to make something whenever you want.
Yeah, it's the iteration thing of if I've got this really long, boring corridor. I want to put a little room in the middle of it in order to make it a bit more engaging. So in the old way, you'd grab the editor, you'd go into top-down view, you'd literally draw out that big new square for that room, you'd hit play and you'd be in there and you'd be saying, okay, it's a bit too small, I want to make it a bit bigger, a bit smaller, blah, 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 and you'd be iterating and you'd have that made. Whereas now, as Joe says, you've got to go walk over to the artist, you've got to say, I need this mesh at this size, I need this. There are interim
which
solutions.
Means you probably just don't do it. So you
exactly, yeah.
I guess I don't like it, but it's fine. And it feeds into everything. People used to I guess because I was big in Half-Life community level design back in the day, but people would always latch onto stuff Valve said in a developer commentary. And they were always saying, don't be afraid to cut stuff, and always cut and always keep on iterating, because the cost of cutting something is probably less than the cost of leaving it in real terms.
Yeah.
Which has historically been true, but with this, the more you go into this direction, the more the cost of the more it's the other way around, right? Ends up costing you more to try to be good at the thing.
Yeah, because you have to pay that person to make that thing. Then if that thing doesn't work out, it's like you said, you just leave it in there because it's just not worth the hassle of going back.
Yeah. I mean, the solution, the kind of the interim solution that I've used on a few projects is you do what's called grey boxing, where you go, okay, we're not going to get the artist to make that room all pretty because we are iterating. We'll model a very low poly version. Everything will be grey. Players have probably seen this on stuff like we're going to use some blocks, but even that's constraining, and that's you're asking a level designer to be a modeler at that point potentially, which is a completely different skill set. I remember one project I worked on, we used SketchUp, which is the worst level design tool ever. So we used SketchUp to make, which is a Google 3D modeler designed for like architects and hobbyists, and we used that to make levels, and then we would export those into the game. But then it's just that loop time. It's that if I made a room and I want to work out and if it's the right size and I want to fix it. So an example of this from Coda. Was we had door frames in the game in VR. There were doors around the room, and and we wanted to make those doors feel kind of natural. And there were some issues with distortion, so it wasn't as easy as just measuring a door frame and matching it. We had to fiddle and push things up and down. And the iteration time from me changing it on my computer, doing the build, putting it onto my VR device, loading up in VR, seeing it, deciding whether it was the right size or not, go back to my computer, that took probably around 10 minutes. And that immediately disincentivizes you from fiddling with it for very long, because you're like, well, we're going to change it 3 or 4 times because you want to move on to the next thing. You have to move on to the next thing. If that had just been 5 minutes rather than 10 minutes, that would have been the thing. Now, we did get those door frames fine, and they're lovely doors. But it's anything you can do to cut down the time needed to test a solution and to change the solution is massive.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a time towards the end of development where you have to be like, okay, lock that. We can't change this thing.
Yeah.
And the more level design moves in this direction, the more you have to pull that forwards on every level to probably a few weeks after you made it initially. And, that thing is locked from very early in development. And you see that creeping
into game design from like a player facing perspective. I don't think it's a coincidence that we've started to rely on things like regenerating health. Regenerating health means that your level design doesn't have to necessarily take into account a lot of factors, and it's why we're seeing a lot more corridor shooters rather than big open spaces. There's that image that does the rounds where it's like 1998 level design is all this complex, awesome geometry, and then modern day first person shooters just a corridor, and any game developer who was around for those games knows why that was the case, was because you can achieve those two outcomes in exactly the same amount of time depending on the tools you're using. And it's kind of forced a way of, especially first person shooters being designed, that I don't think anyone's that happy about. But then the flip side of that is, if you were to release a game that was made in the kind of the traditional way, it wouldn't necessarily look as nice, and then you'd have negative comments on YouTube videos. So it's kind of it's hard to say like if you could actually fix this. But I'd love to see Epic take a run at like building this.
Yeah. Well, it was sort of bad news today, and I don't know if you saw these tweets. I was on a forum thread about this, and a senior level designer at Epic came in like, I don't really know why you would improve the tools.
Oh wow!
He had some. I don't want to rag on him because I love Epic and they're great and they do nice things for me. But it was a bit of an eye opener. It was a really AAA perspective on it, where things like how important is it that a level designer that a level editing tool lets you get into a flow and get that going, when realistically at a studio you're being constantly interrupted by people asking you questions, so you're just not going to get into that state. and things like that just being brought up as reasons not to improve tools,
make things better. I can kind of see it from both angles, I'll be honest, but it's just a really interesting aside, and that's not specific to Unreal or Unity. That's just basically two old guys moaning about modern video game engines. That's all that is.
If anything, it's better in Unity actually, because Unity has more plugins because the marketplace.
Yeah, there are some kind of tools that point in that direction, but again, you're using third-party tools, and is that going to be buggy, and is it going to impact performance, and blah 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 blah.
Well, for my game, I'm actually using Hammer, which is the source engine level editor.
You're exporting that as a mesh, are you, or something?
A friend of mine has made a plugin called Hamuer, which imports source engine map files and also textures and models if you want straight into Unreal, and it's great. I'm just making levels in the only tool that's still good for making levels.
That's like buying a $500 car and then putting like an expensive car chassis on top of it. That's amazing.
Yeah.
that's like a proper hack. That's great.
Yeah, it's really good. I was recently looking for level designers, and I just couldn't find anybody with a decent level design portfolio who wasn't working with the Source Engine or Quake. Like, there's a pretty vibrant Quake 1 mapping community still, and there's some of the only places you can still get a good level designer.
Wow.
So to wrap things up here, the costs involved in these two elements. So Mike, while Joe and I talk about Unreal for a second, just double check the costs of.
I'm going to have to because I know they just changed it.
Because I know they just changed it.
Twitter got very angry for about half a day. Yeah, I need to have a look because to be honest, like we bought all of the stuff, so I think we're okay for the short term. But yes, let me just. Yeah. I'll look while you're saying. Go on.
So the question from the audience was, can you give more details about how the process of payment for Unreal Engine 4 looks like? How do you determine the correct amount of money that needs to be paid to Epic Games? When do you pay? Where and how do you pay? Do you need to give Epic Games some additional documents related to your earnings from your games made with Unreal Engine 4? Okay. So I'll take this one as we're going to carefully walk along the lines of an NDA without crossing it. And I even made sure to check with Epic about all of these details so that I wouldn't cross that line. So anyway, I'll start by quoting directly from Epic's UnrealEngine.com site. Quote, once you've begun collecting money for your product, you'll need to track gross revenue and pay a 5% royalty on that amount after the first $3,000 per game per calendar quarter. To report your earnings, complete and submit this form. So they have a really nice, just hyperlink there, and that's where you do all your submission for that. Now, the word I want anyone thinking of jumping into the pool who doesn't have a biz person in their life to focus on the word gross in that quote. What you want to make sure you see in any royalty deal ever is the word net, as it means the money after the platform holders take their cut. So gross is all the monies. You don't want to give away all the monies. You want to give the money that you receive after the people that have to get paid by the platforms take their cut. So if you're putting a game out on UE4 and are building a business or think your game has a real chance in the marketplace, then I would strongly, and Epic encourages this too, I would strongly encourage reaching out to Epic directly and asking for a, quote, direct license. So anything beyond a hobby game, talk to Epic. They're absolutely open to discussing this, and you want a direct license. If you're doing hobby games, fine, you can completely go under the sort of general user agreement. But if you're doing anything that you're planning on putting on the marketplace, you do not want to be giving away that level of money. It's not right. Joe, is there anything you'd like to add in here?
No, it sounds like you've covered it.
Okay. Mike, Unity.
Yes. So the first thing I've noticed is they're actually giving their source code now, which is interesting. I'm just going to double check the wording because I feel like there's probably something going on there. So basically, I mean, Unity do it the other way around. So Unreal asks for a percentage of your profits. Unity asks for an upfront payment. It used to be that you could purchase, and that's what we've done, an engine like all out. But everyone coming in now, it's going to be a monthly fee. They have several layers. There's Enterprise, which is kind of their completely hidden secret one. So if you're running a team with 40 people, probably give them a call, ask about Enterprise. There's a personal edition, which is free, but is missing a lot of kind of what I would consider very important features, like performance reporting in particular is the one that's really important. Because, when you're trying to get your game up to 60 FPS, that's kind of essential. Then you've got Plus, which is their more kind of in-depth one, which which bumps up stuff, gives you performance reporting, gives you the classic Unity dark grey UI, which people like. That's probably the most visible change, is they just allow you to make your UI a bit cooler looking. And then Pro, which is $125 per seat per month, which is where you get your source code access. And although I'm going to look into the source code access thing, because I almost don't believe that. You get your source code access, and you get to be making stuff with a bit more visibility. Also, you can customize your splash screen at that level. One thing that's very interesting about Unity is, there is a negative connotation to a game starting with the Unity splash screen, which is really kind of odd when you think about it, because every other engine does that. But I think there's just been a few less than brilliant Unity games out there that have kind of made that something that people maybe want to avoid. So that's Pro. So yeah, you're looking at $125 per seat per month. So depending on the size of your company and the cost of your game, that makes Unity or Unreal, probably on a price level, incredibly easy decision. Like basically, if you're looking at a team of 10 people making a game that costs $20, that's going to be a very different kind of price difference than if you're a team of 1 making a $5 game. So it's going to need some maths.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to thank Joe, Mr. Wintergreen, for being on today's episode. Joe, any final thoughts? Any other things you just want to add in terms of rah Unreal?
I enjoy Unreal, and I think it's good. And Mike, that effect that you learned shaders for with volume, with the polygons flying out from each other. I could do that in 20 minutes right now. I'll do it right now.
You know what you are? You're a jerk.
Thanks, Joe. And now it's time for what's going on at the studio this week. Mr. Mike Bithell found out about a little thing going on in the business world, and I'm gonna kind of let him talk about it.
I was a little cheeky on Twitter.
Yeah. You got a little cheeky.
A little cheeky on Twitter,
and in a way, I'm not used to seeing you get cheeky. So I figured we should bring it up on the show, because it is important, because one of the major elements of the UK's sort of rebirth in the industry has been some video games tax relief, and you have been a proponent of video games tax relief. You've spoken about it, and but there's some advantages being taken. Go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, so I should specify, this isn't anyone we're working with. It's just a story that I've heard and from people who I trust. So to give some context, so tax relief in the UK for games industry is currently this really cool scheme where if you're making a video game, spending your own money on a video game, you can then, after the game's shipping, it's specifically after release, isn't it? If I remember right.
I mean, you could set it up.
You could do an interim one, but
yeah, you could do it quarterly. But I mean, for an independent developer, for most of the folks who listen to this show, you would be doing it when you do your taxes every single year.
So effectively, it allows you to claim back 20% of the costs of production, specifically development, of creating the game.
Yep, of creative development.
You have to kind of pass a cultural Britishness test, which it's very hard to fail, and has been put together in such a way that it's incredibly hard to fail that test. If you're listening to this and you're doing so from within the UK, you're probably fine. And then once you've passed that test, you get 20% of your dev costs back as tax relief, which is great. And a really cool system, which incentivizes me as someone who hires people and who makes games to spend more money on games, because effectively I know 20% of the money I invest into making games comes back to the company anyway, regardless of if a game flops. So that's great for me as a developer. What it's also great for, and what it's working really well in the film industry, and I think we're going to start seeing this coming in more and more in games, is in the film industry. If you're a film company who wants to make a big movie, you can get investment from overseas, because you can go to those investors and go, hey, you're guaranteed 20% of the money you spend on this film back, even if no one sees this movie. And that's a really, that's very attractive to an investor, to make an investment where they know they have kind of a guaranteed return on at least some of it, So that's helping to secure film investment. It's also meaning that big, mega kind of Hollywood blockbusters, lots of them have scenes set in London now, and that's not a coincidence that the latest Bourne has a London scene. The latest, not this new Star Trek, but the last Star Trek had a scene set in London. Everything's getting those London-based scenes. It's a big tax efficiency thing. That's why they do it. So that's good because people come in to the country, and lots of people work on those films. My girlfriend works in the film industry. She's working on a film which benefits from these kind of things, and is being made in the UK, at least in part, because of these benefits being available to filmmakers. Where it goes wrong is video game publishers are doing something cheeky, or a couple of indie game publishers. So indie game publishers are already a very interesting thing, because in a lot of cases, people who publish indie games are not actually doing kind of the traditional role of a publisher. So crucially, they're not investing. So they're finding indie games that they think are cool, and then they're helping them to cross the finish line. So maybe some support in terms of bug fixing, some support in terms of marketing, and maybe some support in terms of porting costs. Now, the problem... I
would say they're efficiency experts.
They're efficiency experts. They're coming in and they're just helping games across the finish line. And in a lot of cases, that's actually really valuable. If you're making an indie game for PC and you're looking at console and thinking, well, that's just something I haven't got the time to do, there's publishers out there who'll help you with that.
Or you're a developer and you're looking at console going, that's not hard. Yeah, no.
No, it is hard. It's quite hard, and it's valid to try and get help with that, and that's useful. If you're one of those publishers, though, one of the real problems there is there's two very specific parts of this brilliant tax relief scheme that make it a problem for publishers. One is you can't claim against marketing or bug testing. Or
public relations,
which is a big chunk of the services they provide. So they can't claim back any of that. And also, you can only claim on a game once. So if I'm making a video game with a publisher, if I claim, money back on development, even if they've also done development on the game, it's very tricky for them to separately get that money back. They probably can't. So both of those things mean that these publishers, there's 20% of all the money being spent on games coming back, and they're not getting any of it. Now, in some cases, we are seeing people doing the kind of the film studio model, where you're going to publishers and going, give me $5 million for this game, and I guarantee you'll worst case scenario get $1 million back from the British government, which is totally fair enough. They've got skin in the game. They're making an investment. That's great. That means money coming into the country and giving people jobs. What some of these indie publishers are adding to their contracts, and they're doing it quite sneakily, because I think they're relying on the fact that indie developers don't really know about this tax relief or don't know what it is.
Because they don't read contracts.
And
because you should have a lawyer.
You should have a lawyer. That's definitely the subtext here. But what they're adding to these contracts is they're adding this clause whereby, even though they've not invested in the game, they are requiring the developer to claim the tax relief and then give them that money.
So let's take a second.
Profoundly cheeky.
So let's take a second here.
Yeah.
So you are Mike Bithell. Right?
Hi, I'm Mike Bithell.
And you are making a game, let's say, for the sake of argument, it's £100,000.
Yeah.
Bless you for making a game for £100,000. But let's say you were making a game for £100,000.
I've got my 100,000 right here. I've just spent it on making a game. Oh God, Alexander, it's all gone. I've spent all of it on the game.
Okay. Now, this publisher is not giving you any extra money.
No, but they're doing a great job of helping me with trade events and marketing and PR. So they're doing a really valuable kind of job, which is very useful. Okay. But no, they've not spent any money on the game, no.
So what this contract is doing is saying that they get to claim your tax relief, the 20% back that you would get of the $100,000 that you spent.
So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna file all the paperwork, and the British government's gonna give me $20,000, and then I'm going to send that to the publisher. Yes, that's the plan. Now, where I think the very obvious kind of counter argument here is, but they are doing valuable work. They are helping with production, with getting the game out there. They're helping with marketing and support for the game. Why shouldn't they get, something else in the contract? And the answer to that is, like any contractual stuff, of course they can ask for it. They have every right to ask for it. It's whether or not you think that the service they provide is worth that. And crucially, if you're giving them a percentage of your game anyway, which is a percentage of net, not of gross, as discussed earlier or later in the podcast. Earlier, right?
Earlier.
This podcast is recorded in order. Does that not cover it? Do you not feel that if you're giving up, let's say 30% of what you've made to this publisher anyway, do they deserve that 20% of every penny you spent out of your own pocket on development? It's not evil. It's not awful, but in my mind, it's a bit cheeky, and it's something that I certainly wouldn't sign that contract.
I also don't think I don't think the average person gets it until it happens to them, because all of this stuff business is messy. Like, no, I mean, there's a reason I exist in this company. Like, business is messy, and this is not something that someone wants to think about. It is certainly not something that a developer trying to get their game done wants to think about. And if the publisher is taking anywhere from 30 to 50% of your, because they're getting you through Peggy, they're getting you onto Steam and handling all the copy for that and all the asset production, and they're getting you through all those things that a publisher could get you through. You should still be getting money from them, but that's a discussion for another time. But if they're handling all the easement stuff, then okay, maybe that 20% that you're getting back from VGTR would cover the work that they've put into it, because it can be a significant chunk of money. But if you're doing VGTR, which I would consider to be your sort of startup costs on your next project, plus the anywhere from 30 to 50% that you are providing them as having been your publisher, that's getting into uncomfortable territory. Just for me, like I do not imagine a scenario where we would give up the VGTR portion of our we certainly wouldn't sign that portion of it unless we were talking about vast sums of money.
If we were talking about a big investment, I think there is an argument for building that in and going, you know what?
Because it's risk mitigation on their part.
Yeah, right? And I think it's justified when when a company's investing, and we are talking low millions here. If they're investing low millions in a game, sure, I think it's a fair thing. But basically, it's something to keep an eye out for. But also hire a lawyer, and specifically hire a lawyer who knows the game stuff and who's going to spot that line, because we are talking about something that you might brush past on page 9 of a contract, and in the scenario where your game doesn't do great, that tax relief, as Alexander says, might be the thing that gets you to have the resources to make the prototype for the next game. Like, without that money, you might find yourself in a difficult position. So yeah, it's a shame. It surprised me when I heard about it. I'm not, we're not going to name names on the show, but just keep an eye out. And it's funny, I've had a lot of the other, because I can't say who I've been in touch with because it would give away the other thing, but like, I've had other publishers since get in touch with me and go, who the hell's got that in their contract? Because it's going to make us look bad, kind of thing. So yeah.
And now here we go with reader mail. I don't have my list of beats of genres, so it's just a cold open. It's a cold open into reader mail. Hi guys, I've been listening for a while and really enjoying the show. It's the only one I have set to auto download. I am an IT administrator for a small CG trailers company in the UK. We are producing some top-end visual graphics for some popular game studios such as Rare. Anyway, it's my job to manage the render farm, which can be a behemoth unto itself. What I was wondering is, do you guys know anywhere where people like me can talk to other like-minded individuals that can share tips and tricks for installing a particular plugin or sharing scripts, or have previous knowledge for silent installs and the dreaded license server, whose main job seems to be to hold on to those licenses as tight as possible and only release them on a full moon? I know this is a little bit off topic, but at this moment, I feel alone, lost in the sea of pipelines, particle tutorials, and teapots. Please help. Dave, a network administrator from Blackpool.
Teapots are a crucial part of the process, and they should not be ignored. That's an odd one. I mean, the first thing to say is that render farms don't really exist in kind of games companies because
what's a render farm?
So okay, let's go back a step. So a render farm is a bank of computers.
CryEngine, what's a render farm?
So it's a bank of computers you use to render stuff. So in video games, we're working in real-time graphics, so we're making graphics and we're immediately putting them on the screen. But when you go and see a Pixar movie, that was rendered on a render farm, so a bunch of networked computers which got those pixels churned out. And that's why Pixar movies look better than real-time games, because they're not rendered at real time. They're rendered at, I think Jurassic Park. It used to take, I think, 4 hours to render a frame of Jurassic Park on a render farm, something like that. So it's a way of companies like his. So he'll be doing like these amazing cinematic trailers, these pre-rendered things, and yeah, that requires something like what he's describing. So actually, when I think about like community and I think about where those people are, I think you're probably going to have more luck finding those people in the film industry than you are in the games industry. It's funny, I had one of the coolest days of my life. I had a tour of Pixar, and I had a tour of Pixar by the U of that company, the guy who does the render farms at Pixar. Or obviously at Pixar, there's a lot of guys who do that. He works in that team. And it was really fun getting the tech eye view of Pixar, because obviously Pixar's very cool, but it was interesting seeing kind of hearing from him like about the nerdier side of the business. So they're out there, but I think you're gonna find them in the film industry rather than the games industry. That would be my tip. I have no knowledge of I'm sure there's got to be a forum of them. There's got to be a mailing list. But I wouldn't know where to start with that, to be honest.
Would the IGDA have anything along those lines?
No.
No?
Unless, I don't know if, so this would be a good question to ask your bosses, like, is your company a part of IGDA? Because to be honest, I'd assume, so IGDA, for those who don't know, is the International Game Developers Association, which is kind of one of the things that's as close to a union as games have, but it's a little bit different and confusing.
I certainly would not use the word union there.
It's one of the things that's closest to a union that we have. I was very carefully with the wording. Confederation
of city-states. That...
Exactly, yeah. It ain't the United Federation of Planets. It's more of a I don't know, the Cardassians. No, not the Cardassians. That's unfair. But yeah, so it's so I don't know, because I would assume that. Yeah, the only companies in the games industry that would have the kind of render farm stuff you're talking about are the companies like other companies like yourself who are rendering. What's similar and maybe different is companies often will have servers. If you're a company that's running a big multiplayer game, a lot of that now is off-site, on the cloud. You've got some... I love the Silicon Valley episode where they show kind of these enormous server banks and what those are like. But like, if you have servers on site, and often companies do, so that might be some of the similar kind of stuff, but the use of a render farm and the use of a server are obviously very different purposes. So I don't know how much overlap there would be, but that's the only thing I can think of in the games industry that would necessitate someone like you administering lots of computers would be a server farm for like an MMO or a massive free-to-play game.
I feel like he's still lonely and we didn't find him any new friends.
No, but he does need to watch that, because there's that episode of Silicon Valley about how lonely it is to run servers. So it's a noble profession, and it keeps all the cool stuff running. So
If you have a burning question about games, game development, or just about the complexities of the universe, you can send those questions to us via contact@BithelGames.com. That's contact@BithelGames.com, through the YouTube comments of the show, or on Twitter by pinging the verified Mike Bithell at Slowinski.
You're not going to drop it, are you?
Volume Game.
You're not going to drop it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bithell Games Podcast. We can always use your support, so please provide reviews and 5 stars on iTunes, and thank you to everyone who's been doing that. Likes and subscribes on YouTube. Thank you to everyone who's been doing that as well. And positive reinforcement on whatever other platforms you're hearing this show on whenever possible. This podcast was produced by Jonathan Downen. We'll be back next week. I'm Alexander Slowinski. Thanks again, and get in the last word, Mike.
Bitterness.